All right, ready for our next night. So, there we go. Okay. So tonight to start, when we started the section, this next chapter was, of course, Damon heading into tobacco fields to pick tobacco. And so I decided to do a little research on that for you because I found that fascinating, the green tobacco sickness. So tobacco workers can suffer from nicotine poisoning, also known as green tobacco sickness, when they handle wet tobacco leaves. Symptoms being nausea, vomiting, dizziness, weakness, headaches, cramps, chills, diarrhea, and salivation. The onset is 3 to 17 hours after exposure and can last for 1 to 3 days. Risk factors, of course, new tobacco workers that haven't done it before, children, adolescents, and when the nicotine mixes with rain, dew, or sweat. So you can see in the picture side, actually, this is a young person working here wearing some protective equipment, gloves, and everything. And then here they are, doing the tobacco before. Let me back up again. This can lead to hospitalization, lost work time. They're also at a greater risk for heat illness, which of course can be deadly. Workers is, of course, they neglected to really enforce to Damon was that he was supposed to wear personal protective equipment like water-resistant clothing, chemical-resistant gloves, plastic aprons, rain suits with boots, wait for the harvest until the tobacco leaves are dry, take breaks and stay hydrated to avoid heat exhaustion, which he did not do, and remove any wet clothing immediately and wash the skin with warm, soapy water. So in most cases, it does resolve itself within 1 to 2 days, but if the symptoms are severe enough, emergency medical treatment may be required, and they use benzodiazepines to control the seizures, IV fluids to treat low blood pressure, atropine to slow your heart rate, and a ventilator to help deliver oxygen if there's respiratory failure. So, of course, Damon, if you remember, they pumped water into him. And in cutting up here, you can see this picture up, the top picture in the corner here are the blades they use to cut the tobacco. And here below, you can see where they're putting them on the rods to lay them out to dry after they've cut them from the shaft.
Green tobacco.
And I wanted to share a little bit of an actual story, which I think resonates with what Damon experienced in the field. Jose Velasquez Castellano started working in agriculture when he was 13, 10-hour days, 5 or 6 days a week in North Carolina's summer heat. It was sometimes blueberry, sometimes cucumber, but mostly it was tobacco. Its prime hits right at the peak of summer, Castellano told NPR, and the tobacco created a greenhouse effect. It would be 90 degrees outside, but inside those fields, it feels well over 100 degrees. He would go home dehydrated and exhausted and then wake up at 4 a.m. the next day and do it again. Today, Castellano is a sophomore at Tufts University, but when he worked, he felt this sense that working in those fields was going to be the rest of my life and that I had nothing else going for me. And I thought that sounded a lot like Damon as he was talking about what it was like to be in there. Now, the interesting thing is under the Fair Labor Standards Act, kids 12 and up can work unlimited hours outside school hours in agriculture. And the rules are even more lenient for kids who work on their family's farm. So outside that, workers have to be 16 to work unlimited hours anywhere else, as opposed to 18. They have not updated agriculture's hazardous occupation orders in 50 years. So despite all the known risks, in 50 years, we haven't done anything to update this. So if a labor inspector goes to a tobacco farm and finds a 12-year-old working, now mind you, Damon was 10 doing this, he was 10, but they find a 12-year-old working, there's no labor violation to report. That's just the way it is. And so advocates have asked the Labor Department to update those occupational things and reflect what's causing kids to get sick, be injured, or die on farms in 2023. So this isn't the 90s, 2023, as opposed to 1970. More broadly, advocates want Congress to give kids in agriculture the same age limits and protections they have in other industries. But of course, they repeatedly have had failed because of opposition from the Republicans in Congress and farm lobbying groups. They argue that such changes would hurt family farms and make it harder to teach kids about farming.
Oh my God.
I'm not sure I believe that like teaching your child about farming is poisoning them and making them want to, work in the fields. It's kind of a crazy thought about how they're dealing with that. But this is going on right now today, this farming. So here, 2/3 of children in tobacco fields experience nicotine poisoning. So 2/3 of those children working. The lower limits of this exposure is the equivalent of 62.5 cigarettes in 1 to 3 days. Children working in tobacco face a higher risk of cancer, reproductive health issues, mood disorders, and permanent neurological damage. globally 1.3 million children under the age of 14 were estimated to be working in tobacco fields. And the Child Labor Coalition estimates in the US about 300 to 400,000 children between the ages of 12 and 17 are working in agriculture. It's pretty staggering to think that, in 2023, this is okay for our kids. You need work papers to go work at Wawa for a couple hours a week, but you can pick tobacco from morning till night. And it doesn't matter. And when they say unlimited hours, they mean in the summer they can, work 16, 18-hour days, which is interesting. And the Dickens thought of this, how all the child labor laws were, enacted to keep children from working for hours a day, but not here and not at this time. So the second thing I looked into, besides the tobacco, is a little bit about foster care in Lee County, Virginia. So here are the requirements to be a foster parent. So now I'm thinking the Macabres, which of course was the next thing where Demon ended up having to go to the Macabres to live with them. You have to be 21, free from communicable disease or health problems that impair your ability to care for children, mentally and emotionally stable, able to meet your financial obligations and have a consistent source of income, not public assistance. And this is hysterical with the Macabres because, of course, their source of income is Demon's $500 a month. And what are you chipping in for food?
Yeah.
Complete pre-services training, complete a home study with the agency and receive a favorable recommendation, and to be able to work with birth family and participate in shared parenting for the best interest of the child. So that's what the requirements are for Lee County. And then just a little bit of more sort of sad statistics about foster care abuse statistics. Neglect affects over 53% of children in foster care. So physical abuse impacts about 16%. Sexual abuse is low, 4.4%. Parental substance abuse affects almost 30% of these children. In 2017, abuse or neglect was confirmed in 9 out of every 1,000 children born in the United States. Of U.S. children, 14% of foster care children remain in the system for 3 years or more. And in 2019, 48% of new foster care entries were children aged 5 or younger. So about half are little tykes going into that system. And when I was just sort of looking around the area, I thought this was interesting. When adjusted for population size, West Virginia, which is just north of Lee County, tops the list for minors living apart from their birth family with 19.8 children for every 100,000 children under 18 in such arrangements. The opposite is New Jersey with 1.6 per thousand. So think about that. West Virginia, it's 19.8, almost 20 kids per thousand, and New Jersey, 1.5. So the overall rate of children in foster care in the United States has stayed consistent, about 5 children per thousand in between 2011 and 2021. But states have seen significant changes like West Virginia. They went from 11.5 in 2011 to almost 20 in 2021. So I thought that was interesting as well to sort of think about when you think about Demon trying to find a home and people taking care of him, and about swap out and fast forward, and Tommy, all of that, those kids looking for a place to stay. A lot of it depends on where you live and what counties you're in, what kind of help is available for people. Because to me, it's amazing that in New Jersey, just, pretty much 1 in 1,000 kids as opposed to 20 in 1,000. So that is the sad story of both green tobacco sickness and the health system, foster care system. So I just put up here, by the way, these scenes behind are either tobacco fields or actually this is some countryside in Lee County that we're looking over. They're actually shots from Lee County to get a little bit to that. But Doc, do you want to say a little bit about your quotes and then we can start with the first one? Or
Yeah,
do
sure.
you want to step out and start with questions?
I'd like to start with questions. How about
Okay,
that?
let me go back out of stop share there and get back out. Whoop, there we go.
Okay, now you have all been charged with coming up with questions. So do you have any that you'd like to start off, or observations about these pages?
I just had a question, Jenny, when you were doing your research, I'm just so surprised at the high number of foster kids and I admit I've read more than the 26 chapters, but the close-knittedness of the community that they wouldn't be taking their own, you know, like their extended families are so extended, and they wouldn't be taking care of more of their, I don't know, I'm just so surprised at that number.
It is surprising when you think, as you say, that there are grandparents and cousins of cousins or whatever to find a place to be taken in. But I think that's sort of the contrast you see in the book, the difference between somebody like June who takes in her sister's child, you know, and adopts her and can care
And
for her, and the
Paget.
Peggotts who I think who would
Mhm.
like to take in Demon, but they've
Mm.
already got Maggot and he's turning into a handful for them and they're older. And I think that's part of it too. And
They're
you know, as the
overwhelmed with it.
grandparents, you know, it's grandparents it falls on a lot of times. One of my college friends works for SOAN, which is a group in Philadelphia that where grandparents are raising their grandchildren because the parents are not there. I mean, they're in prison, they're wherever, and the kinds of help they have to provide for them to be able to have the children, like, you know, that they don't have the technological skills to help them with school and, you know, just all the different things with that. And I've learned a lot through that particular group, what's necessary for parents who are grandparents who suddenly like are living their retired life and now have 2 3-year-olds with them or a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old that they didn't expect to raise, how difficult that is. And I think in maybe places like Lee County and around in Appalachia, the poverty similar to the Macabres, like they took him in for the $500, but they didn't have enough money to do anything, and the $500 wasn't even helping them keep their house and their car, let alone feed Demon and their own kids. So yeah, it's a tough situation, I think.
I also think it's interesting in real life. I'd have to think, not necessarily in the book here, but if the grandparents, if the parents of the parents that have the kid, if the middle piece breaks down, addiction, overdose, etc., I'd have to think somewhere that the grandparents, there's some animosity there, regardless of how much they'd want to love the grandchild. There might be like, I told you so, I told you this would happen in their mind, and then they end up shunning the grandchild. It sounds like a terrible, you know, kind of a circle of events, but I'd have to think that that probably happens at some point where they're like, well, I told you not to have a kid because you're a drug addict and this, that, the other thing. Then they're out of the picture and that kid gets, you know, ignored. I'd have to think some scenario of that happens too. Not necessarily in the book.
I remember that it was first time I read the book, it was actually a surprise to me that the Peggotts did not agree to take in.
Oh. Mhm.
And some of you are nodding your heads. Why was it a surprise for you? I saw you nodding your head, Hillary, and
Yeah, it
I've
just
been.
seemed so out of character. It seemed so harsh and out of character, and it was very clear how much they loved him and trusted him, and you know, he went on vacation with them, and then I was very angry with them when they didn't.
To me,
I
it's a
couldn't
king.
understand it.
I think it's a device by Kingsolver and myself that, you know, we kind of all were down the primrose path, not necessarily primrose, but a path to say, hey, the Peggotts will end up, this will all turn out. And then Kingsolver pulls the rug and is like, nah, they're not taking them.
I think they were mad at themselves too. I mean, I think that's partly why they kind of didn't want him there that Christmas, because there was the guilt of this this kid's family, but they just couldn't be there for him. And I mean, I imagine it probably killed them inside as much as it killed him. But you know, they just thinking through, they're old, they can't afford it, they can't do what they need to do.
Well,
I
I
think they were
also
as
think
mad
that,
at this as we were.
Yeah.
that Maggot was their charge, and that they needed to protect Maggot first,
Mm.
and possibly it was just extending them too much to have two of the same age at the same time.
And they wouldn't qualify for foster care payments unless they were certified as a foster family.
Mm.
Plus, too, I think Maggot was a handful. I mean, he wasn't, you know, had he been your exemplary little child, not having a lot of issues, it might have been a little easier for them. But I think they, you know, they were struggling with Maggot. and understanding him, I think it made it hard for him. That I was so surprised that when they didn't even say, look, we'll take you for a year. I mean, he was only 10, so he's not a teenager yet. I get that having 2 teenagers in the house, for grandparents would be a handful, but at 10, he would have done anything for them. I think, he would have cooked and cleaned and helped. And I thought, gosh, they could take him for a year just to see how things sort out while they look for a better situation. Certainly a better situation than the Macabres, who were a disaster.
But it does point to what Derek said, about, the need to sort of, the book certainly does have some very positive characters as caregivers, and that family is. But I think, there's also that point where King Saber, is saying, there's a limit. There's a limit. So while we can praise the caregivers, it doesn't mean that they ultimately are the solution to this larger problem. You know what I mean? Yeah. Other responses? Yes.
A question maybe more appropriate for after we're finished, but are there other parallel books where a book is rewritten sometime later with the same issues and characters that have similar names? So are there other examples of this?
That's a great question.
Well, with what Charles said, and like my brain's in like lock mode because I did read Copperfield beforehand because I didn't remember it. I wanted to read it, so I did. And like we have these discussions of who did what, when, and where, why. But like she's mirroring Copperfield, so she's not going to go anywhere else with some of these people. It's sort of a simple observation, but and I read it, then read Demon, and I'm like, she just rewrote this thing. Yes, with all these current social situations, but it's like, why is someone doing what they're doing? Well, that's what happened in Copperfield, and this stops here, this goes here. But
Charles, I'm going to do some research into that for us before the end and look into that, because I'm not familiar with any that I know of where they've taken a book almost, not word for word, but character for character and event for event, and just change the situation.
Jenny, I'm going to forward you this. I just found a great website that has a whole bunch of examples. I'll send it to you.
Send that to me, and I'll get that together for next time to talk about that.
Are you going to tease us with one example, Derek? Or
let me see what I have here.
Oh, there we go. A Jane Austen remake with vampires.
There's a book called So Many Beginnings, which is a Little Women remix.
There we go. Then they're out there.
And zombies and Sense and Sensibility and sea monsters.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Obviously, this is a thing people are doing.
Or if people are science fiction fans, I mean, Frank Herbert wrote Dune in 1950s, 60s, and then for all you Star Wars fans, Star Wars is a copy off of Dune.
I have to be, to admit total ignorance for any of the titles that you've mentioned.
Dune's like a famous sci-fi book.
I'm embarrassed, but it's just like
you would like. Dune,
I am totally ignorant. Yeah,
but there's lots of rewrites and lots of copies. But my point is, I was just reading this after this, and it's like, well, she's not going to go anywhere else. She's putting in the context of these things, but why really, who does what is because of what's happening in Copperfield. But
yeah.
There's one by Sherry Thomas called A Study in Scarlet Women.
Like Sherlock Holmes and Ron.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, maybe we send that link out to everybody. Send it to me and I'll get it out to everybody so they can look at some more. I know a question I had, not a question, but sort of a thing to discuss is I was taken by a thing in chapter 19 where he talked about I was the person not invited. What it's like to be the person not invited for that whole Christmas, where he went, but he felt like nobody wanted him. That was really good. That, really touched my heart when he said that and thought about what it's like to be the person not invited.
And yet, I mean, the other really cool thing about it is even though he wasn't invited, which I think that so many of the characters in the book are people who might not be invited, right? But it did give him the opportunity to fall in love. That Christmas time with Emmy.
Well, and people took him in as well, but gave him presents. I mean, it ended
Yeah,
up being
but
nicer than he
yeah.
thought, but the
But
whole,
he was surprised when he got a present.
right.
I
You know,
think I feel
yeah.
like for the most part, unless either the not invitee or the not inviters are just mean people, then for the most part, if you're not invited and you show up anyway, it'll be maybe annoying at first, but then it's not that big of a problem. Like Demon isn't a horrible person,
Yeah.
and neither are the Peggets. So it all goes smoothly. If either party were, not pleasant, it wouldn't go well.
Good point. Good point.
I thought as a narrator, he was really amazingly kind of self-aware. I guess it's hard to say like when he had these thoughts, but
Yeah.
as such a young kid where he was like, oh, like these socks, must have been Mr. Peggett's because we're the same sock size, but it's like so sweet that it got regifted. Hard to say if he had that realization then, but it was kind of amazing to see how much he appreciated like where these presents came from and how he was brought in last minute.
That's one of the reasons why it's I very deliberately sent you like 2 positive responses to the novel and 2 negatives, but it's moments like the one you just mentioned that makes me really think that the negative, okay, I like the book, all right, but still, I think the negative comments often missed a lot of the humanity of the book and of the courage of Demon. But what are some other questions that you have before we bother with those quotes?
Well, this isn't a question, but the first phrase or question you presented, when they talk about she makes the people of Appalachia into objects of pity, intimates that falling into drug abuse, rejecting education, clinging to their ways or moral choices. So I don't have that perspective of Virginia, but I do have of West Virginia. I've spent a fair amount of time there. And I will say that, so like if you talk to West Virginians, they won't call West Virginia, they'll call it Best Virginia. Okay. And so this Appalachia, I mean, they have a tremendous sense of pride from where they come from. Salt of the earth. And in fact, when I say salt of the earth, there are actually a lot of salt mines in that Appalachia Trail. I don't know if you knew that. That's where the country used to get a lot of its salt from. It was ocean bed at one point. But anyway, they are, they'll give you the shirt off their back. They have nothing, but they will give you the shirt off their back. So kind. I mean, they like to say they're America, right? That's what they're very proud of.
I think it also, I feel like it hits different after the opioid crisis because I can't imagine that I'm the only one that has lost somebody like that was close to me so in my case, it was one of my roller derby teammates and like my ride or die, very, very close friends that eventually lost her ongoing battle with fentanyl and heroin. And I will openly admit, I went to GA. I came from a very privileged background, KSOS did too, so it's no longer something that's just, meth Virginia. It's not West Virginia, that kind of thing. It's the drug abuse, the opioid crisis has kind of hit all walks of society. So it's harder for us to kind of, at least, and again, this is something that I've directly experienced and I imagine a lot of others have too. And once you've experienced, it's harder to kind of look on the moral choices because you've seen people fight those fights. and have those battles and like try and make that moral choice in a sense. So that's like the scene when his like, because I remember that phone call coming in, and you never forget that, like, you know, what you were doing when that came in. And I kind of, that moral choice thing really bothered me, because you don't say that to somebody with a broken leg or with depression or with other that are like fighting kind of other diseases, for lack of a better word, but addiction's kind of the same thing. So that kind of, when I don't know, but the addiction is just something that it hits all walks of life, and I don't think it's a moral choice. But that's just me on my like little soapbox. But that, like, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I kind of wanted to mention that whole thing about the impact of addiction, how it's everywhere in America, not just, you know, the Appalachia and the poor.
Right. But I think the other part of that that's important to note too is that the Appalachia area was targeted with OxyContin, you know, that the pharmaceutical companies went out of their way to go there and get the prescriptions out and hook those people. And so you're right, it wasn't a moral choice. Somebody went, because I was working in the coal mine or I was working in the tobacco field and my back hurts from working 16 hours a day, have some OxyContin, have some more OxyContin, have a higher dose, you know, just keep doubling it, tripling it, and telling them there are no side effects. And, you know, that's obviously going to be something that's going to become more in the book as we go along. And, you know, I'll be touching on that with some other stuff about that, but it's, you know, they targeted them. And so therefore it wasn't any kind of moral choice. It wasn't like, you know, hey, everybody's smoking marijuana, I think I'll try it, you know, or we're drinking at a party and I think I'll have some alcohol because my friends made me do it. This was a doctor saying, here's your prescription, take this. And then hooking these people and knowing they'd be hooked. And not really having the support system to care for them, to just let them, you know, go down the drain until America finally woke up to what, you know, Purdue Pharmaceuticals was doing. So you know, and of course there are plenty of Netflix shows you can watch on that, but, you know, I think that's the travesty, is they were targeted as well.
Yeah,
And
that's really
beyond
good.
that, your moral choice question comes up with people who may be addiction prone, genetically or biochemically, situations where they're in such a mental state or circumstance where they try something and didn't realize that they would then become addicted to it. So it's a lot of circumstantial things that it's not a moral choice. It's a situational event.
It's actually physiological
Mhm.
for a lot of people.
Yeah, I
did
think that moral choice phrase just, you know,
Patronizing.
oh my God, just angered me so much, you know, that, you know, who are you, Lorraine Berry? And I don't know who the hell she is, but other than that she writes for the Boston Globe, but who are you to be making definitions of moral choices, you know? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing was like, come on, look at what happens to the people in the novel. I mean, she's talking about the novel. Are they really making moral choices to become addicted? You know, come on. It's just you know, well, it follows her thesis that, you know, of the wallowing, of the pathetic nature of these characters, and how, I mean, uh,
The inevitability of failure.
exactly, yeah, good point.
Like, I don't know. I mean, again, I've read more, but yeah, it's just I'm obsessed with this book, but I just really, I'm loving what she's doing with stereotypes, and I think we touched on that a little bit in the first class about like stereotypes, how you breaking out of it, and it's that same, how you're tattooed from birth. But I don't see it as, I don't know. I mean, yes, it's so depressing with the drug use. I just, there's something so special about Demon that is, you know, it isn't at all the inevitability of failure.
Mm.
I almost have to wonder though, like, so the story is about Demon.
Yeah.
So then there's like the inevitable question is like, is Demon all that special, or is he only really all that special because the spotlight is being shown on him, that we're hearing his internal monologue? He's no longer part of the chorus, and he's actually the main character telling his story, that if we were to take the spotlight and turn it on like any other kid in Appalachia and hear their internal monologue and hear the crises that they're having, what they're facing, like would we be having the same conversation about them and heralding their resilient nature? Now we know Demon gets out because he's writing, because of what he's alluded
Right.
to,
Yeah.
and not everybody does, and sometimes it's a tragedy, sometimes it's a triumph, but like I'm almost wondering if the only reason he's all that special is because he's the one that, everyone's cat is best cat, right? So it's like everyone's main character is the best main character in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
But I do think that November 19th, A Birthday to Remember, is, or A Birthday to Never Forget, I should say, which is Demon's birthday, which is also the day that his mother passes away,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that, and then the question that he
November
asked-
19th?
That's what it says. It says November 19th.
That's today, yeah.
It is, it's
Never to
today.
forget. It's
Yeah, we
Demon's
planned
birthday.
that.
So he is
We
special.
thought about that when we set up the dates.
But then he does ask the question on page 106, what's Oxy?
Right,
This
at the end of the
is
chapter, he said, what is Oxy, right?
kind of coming full circle already, and then we'll see what else happens later on. But
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
That whole scene where Miss Barks is trying to talk to him, he says, it's okay, she forgot my birthday. I know she forgot my birthday. That's not a problem. She does a great way of sort of making these things so gripping that are happening.
And
You know,
funny,
Rachel,
which was why I took offense to the last quote. I found it, so much of her writing was so funny and so, and it's a dark humor. So I
Yeah.
was offended by that.
yeah.
No, I agree, Hillary. I mean, it's amazing writing. I mean, I have a question. Like, are her other books written not like this? Obviously, it's not like this, but is it this captivating, bring you in prose? It's crazy. I mean,
Yeah, I've read
like-
about 5 or 6 of her books.
Yeah,
They're all
me too.
it's the
unbelievably
same kind of
good.
thing. Like, it's almost, and all of you are going to be like, no way. But like, it's almost sort of like Stephen King-ish. You know what I mean? Just in terms of the character, like the,
No.
I
I
don't know,
feel like
development.
Stephen King writes a lot of stuff from the voice of a young boy. So I feel like that's
Thank
kind
you,
of,
Sarah.
Okay.
I can see
think that's
that.
what got
Yeah.
me.
I get
Okay.
that too, because I generally do not like Buildings for Mom or like stories of a kid growing up.
Yeah.
Give me your Doones, your epic sci-fis, your fantasy, like nerd books is generally what I really enjoy. So I'm surprised I like this book as much as I do, because generally
Yeah.
I think the stories of people I find boring. I swear I'm not a bad person, but like I think it's the prose, and I think it's how engaging a writer he is, and the humor. There is, again, it's gallows humor, but it's still cheeky.
It's
Yeah.
Sarah, you're right about the kid though too. That's what got me. You're right, like Talisman and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean it's amazing.
But it's very dark.
yeah.
It's those two,
Yeah.
it's like the young boys and very dark and unfiltered and kind of like unchecked by parents.
Totally. Yep. Thank you. You nailed it for me.
Right.
But
It's
I'm
also
gonna-
like King, I think the tie-in of the contemporary. Stephen King draws you in because he's always talking about, the music, the books, the television within that area. Just like, he talks about when he gets picked up by the hitchhiking girl and they're discussing, Sabrina the Teenage Witch or whatever, that he, hearkens to things that and it doesn't seem like, oh, I don't really know what they're talking about here. But I know Stephen King, I've read every one of his books, engages you almost immediately. You care about the people, and I think she does the same thing.
Exactly. That's the thank you too. That's the thing, because this book, I mean, I think we all ripped through this, right? I mean, holy smokes.
In response to your, the initial question, which is, are all of her books written this well? I think they're all very well written. The big, I think I only at GA, I think I only taught The Bean Trees, which I believe was her first.
Was her first
Yeah,
novel.
we had to read that for school. I remember reading that in 7th grade, 8th grade. We had to read it for over the summer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, but and I think I must have, I can't I have no idea about years. Like all of you are really 18. All of my former students, you're still 18. I can't, so I don't even know when I taught Bean Trees, but I remember it was into 10th graders. and it was in the 10th grade class, and it was very positively, I mean, they responded very positively to it. But the rap against Kingsolver has been, and that was mentioned in one of the other quotes, or that she's viewed as almost hyper political, that she has a political agenda. And that's kind of, that's sort of outre now. I mean, in other words, she's taking a big chance and has a lot, to me, has a lot of courage in writing a book like this, because it's not a book that is usually well received by critics.
But so did Charles Dickens.
Exactly. Except he was appreciated more. I mean, there was more, I think, sympathy for him. But that's sort of an important question, or point, is that I think the writing is really good. I haven't read by any means all of her books, but I think there's a pretty much consistent in both the fervor with which she views particular issues and the success of the writing itself. But I think that I mean, there are causes that she believes in, and a lot of her work addresses them directly, including this one.
I don't see on her Wikipedia page, I'm just looking to see, and this is the last book that she's actually written. So
Yeah.
it's going on 3 years now since this was published.
When was that
I wonder if
Poisonwood
this is
Bible,
like the
Derek?
swan song, 2022.
When was that?
Poisonwood Bible, I think, was 2000.
Yeah.
Right
Poisonwood
around
Bible was
2000,
98.
2001.
98.
Damn. I've not read that. Is that good?
Yes.
All right.
Which
The
one?
first book they
The
list on her
Poisonwood
wiki
Bible.
page.
Yes. Yeah. And that actually reflects her experiences when she lived in Africa for a time. Yeah, it's very, very good.
But I'm going to ask a question of the guys in the room, and I'm going to ask it tonight, and then I'm going to ask it 2 weeks from now. Her using the voice or as a 10-year-old boy, is this convincing to you? Are these the thoughts you were having when you were a 10-year-old boy? Because when I read it, I still kind of feel like, at least these initial chapters, I'm still hearing a lot of woman.
I say yes, because I mean, I was from 16 pages into the end, I was driven in, and I literally laughed out loud at some point. So I mean, I have to say yes for a lot of
I
things.
agree. I think yes. Also, I would say that I think she treads pretty carefully to not go down the roads where the boys can maybe say, like, I don't think she gets quite into for lack of a better word, like locker room talk, or like young kids, like in gym class and stuff, or the treehouse conversations or something. I think she skirts
Goes
that
right up
pretty
to it,
well,
Derek.
and
Yeah.
just kind of sticks with the facts a little bit. But I think it's convincing to be a
I'm going
boy.
to ask you again in a couple weeks.
I'll give now. At age 10, I was probably still sucking my thumb. So I'm not sure that I can, identify the way you guys have with Demon. But I think one thing that we always have to remember about him as a character, he has been forced to grow up fast. And because of that, yeah, I mean, did I have the same kind of thought? I mean, when he talks, about women being hot, my God, I didn't even know of that concept when I was 10. or at least I'm pretty sure I didn't. Okay. But I think that, you know, everything about him has been sort of, it's been quickened by his circumstances. And therefore, it's almost like out of necessity.
But we also talked about his being a perspective from his adult years, looking back.
Yes.
And I think some of his observations are fairly sophisticated for a 10-year-old about the drug economy and the future of the social worker. Those things are, I think, unexpected to be discussed by a 10-year-old.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think there is that shift. I mean, where, you know, he's speaking, and we do become aware at times of, you know, the adult who was commenting through that other voice, you know, of, you know, more sophisticated issues.
Right.
But
I mean, it's simple. I mean, if she's going to write a book from a 10-year-old perspective, it would be written completely differently. Like
yes,
you would, like we guys as young would, but we all know there's like 9,000 more pages and he's telling it as an adult. So it's going to be an amalgamation of young and old and all that stuff. Yeah.
but yeah, but I, you know, I do think that it's he was, I mean, really, when you think about how he was caring for his mother, you know, when he speaks of how, you know, at the funeral, like how, why isn't anybody talking to me? Why are they, you know, is all their sympathy directed to Stoner? You know, I'm the one who picked her up off the floor, you know, when she had, you know, when she OD'd or when she was having, you know. So I think that I certainly have never experienced anything like that in my life, and certainly not as a child. So I think that, you know, it's almost like, to me, it's almost like, okay, yeah, he's grown up very, very fast, but he's had to grow up very, very fast. And therefore, some of the stuff he says is reflective of that process, as well as some of it being the process of the adult. That makes sense.
There was a really powerful line when he was walking in the woods with Emmy that I wrote down that it just kind of like stopped me in my tracks when I was listening to it, where he said, being grown-ups, it would be so much safer than being a kid. And I thought that was just like so powerful and kind of devastating. But it does make you think that that's exactly what his thoughts were as a child, that like he would have so much more control because he'd just been, I guess, hurt by so many adults that being a kid is just so unsafe.
Really good. You got a table slap for that.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. What do the rest of you think of that? I think that is a, you know, a pretty stunning quote.
Sort of the reverse of what you'd expect. Like usually people are like, "Oh, I loved it when I was a child because I felt safe and cared for and loved, and I didn't have any responsibilities." And he has so many responsibilities as a child, from raising his mother, you know, to
Good
farming
point.
tobacco at 10, to, you know, working at Gollies and supplying battery acid for a meth lab. You know, his life is a reverse. It could only get better. I mean, so it is so telling when he says that. I'll feel so much safer as an adult, whereas most people say, gosh, I felt so safe as a child, I'm at a loss as an adult. But he's lived his life in reverse.
Ginny
Yeah.
just reminded me of something really quick. That's interesting. I think we talked on the first call maybe about how I think this is a different sort of racism kind of brought up in this book rather than what we're kind of used to, unfortunately, in literature. But I do think it's interesting. The meth lab isn't like spoken in the same ilk that the oxy is,
Mhm.
and yet it's all pretty addictive stuff, right? I mean, like meth is just as addictive as oxy, and people that are on both are going down the same path. It's not good. And I think it's interesting where they have the separation where it seems like, well, the meth is over here and oxy's over here, but frankly, they're both hellacious, like addictions. And I think that that's interesting that she almost separates the two, like they're not even kind of remotely connected when they are hand in hand, if you ask me.
That's a really, I hadn't thought of that at all. What do the rest of you think about that? Because
Well, Oxycontin or whatever it is prescribed. It was like given freely. You could get it kind of anywhere. You could get injured and get it given to you by people who you should trust. Whereas meth, you have to seek it out.
mm,
Yeah, you couldn't write a story with meth because, I mean, just from personal experience, every time, not every
Okay.
time, but a lot of remediations we've done, Superfund sites. There was one I did when I was really young. We found a meth lab in the woods. So it's like you can have Oxy in the book sort of as a foil, because obviously it's Copperfield, but the meth stuff, I mean, they find meth labs all the time on the back of woods and places like that, where it's like Lee's saying, it's illegal and it's hidden, but it's crazy. I mean, you find it and all of a sudden it becomes like another whole thing you have to deal with because there's chemicals to handle, drums and stuff, like Breaking Bad type stuff. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. 4 or 5 times last 30 years we encountered in the woods meth labs. It's crazy.
I thought it was interesting too with Mr. Ghali and talking about being an untouchable and the culture in India and Demon sort of feeling like an untouchable where he was. I thought it was very interesting him telling his stories of growing up on the trash heap, and it made me think. I'm trying to think what that movie was. With the young boy, it was Dev Patel where he fell, in the garbage thing. It was so horrible. And I read another book that all took place where they lived in a garbage.
The rent collector.
Thank you. The Rent Collector. Yes. And I just read that last summer. And there, that all took place in a garbage pile. And here, demons every day working in a garbage pile. And he talks about it like it's just another way of life in India. And it's something, it never occurred to me here. You don't think of people working in a garbage pile. But obviously,
Slumdog. Oh, sorry.
yeah, Slumdog Millionaire. Thank
Millionaire.
you. Thank you.
But interestingly enough, Dev Patel was in a movie called The Personal History of David Copperfield.
Yes, I saw him in that.
oh, whoa,
Wow.
whoa,
Just bringing it full circle.
It's a conspiracy.
yeah, something like that. Anyway,
It's,
wow.
It's the 7 degrees of Charles
Kevin
Dickens
Bacon.
or Kevin Bacon.
But that it's still an interesting point that Derek is bringing up there because, I mean, and in your responses to it have made more sense to me. But I think that there isn't the same danger, right, that is associated with meth in the book, right, as with Oxy.
Well, we don't have
And
a character who's affected by it the same way.
Yeah, it's more like a business rather than the addiction or
yeah,
lies.
yeah, yeah. And again, that it's probably pointing. I mean, she had a definite direction. I mean, she wanted to go after big pharma. That was part of the purpose of this book, and emphasizing or sort of paralleling the meth and the OxyContin would have actually diminished that particular mode of attack, maybe.
There's a quote that I highlighted when he's talking about Miss Barks
Yes.
going for school and the paycheck and all that stuff. But the main thing is, whatever you're doing, who is it making happy? Are you selling the cheapest ass shoes imaginable to Walmart shoppers or high class suits to business guys? Even the same exact work, like sanding floors, could be at the Dollar General or a movie star mansion, and et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of makes me think about this drug comparison as well. because one is from Big Pharma and the other is the people in the garbage dump.
Ethan's Woods.
Yeah. Cool.
I was saying that same thing, but I didn't really know. I was like, that was on my brain, but I was like, I don't know how to make a point out of this. But like, you made sense of it, where it's like two different sources. It's like, what is she saying about the two different sources? That one is like you said, Big Pharma, and one is like backwoods, homegrown meth. Like, what does that say? What is she trying to get us to understand through that? If depending on how intentional it was.
Yeah. What are some areas that we have? I mean, well, if there, I was just looking at these quotes that I gave you guys.
Do you want me to pop up a couple, or
No, I can just.
you got them right there?
I'll read them out.
Okay.
Well, we have actually in the one from the Telegraph, who that wasn't even signed. Demon Copperfield or Demon Copperhead is only sad and glum with every bad thing that happened in the original, looking at Dickens, cranked up a bit. The boy's mother couldn't just be a simple-headed child. She had to be an addict who dies of an overdose. The implication is that if the reader giggles even once, they won't understand the difficulty of poverty in an atomized America. But although she has tried to give a substantial weightiness to her characters by casting them in a classic work, all she has done is burden them with bloat. We've addressed it, because there is humor. There is, and I think what this person misses too is the good heart that exists in this book. And that's certainly one, that's something that we see in all of Dickens, the good heart. Joe Gargery in Great Expectations speaks of, Dickens calls him, he's a man of a good heart. And I think some critics miss that, and they overemphasize the politics that cause Kingsolver to be so damn critical of the world as she sees it,
And she's.
I'm one of these critics. I don't find it funny at all. I
What's
don't
that?
find this story funny at all. I find no humor in it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of it's funny, and I think parts of it, like in David Copperfield, I feel like there's an arc where it's horrible, 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 but starts to get better. Whereas here, just when you think that, as we end this section we read with him finding his grandmother and, finally being somewhere that hopefully this can work out for him, is it going to work out for him? I don't know. But, the arc in David Copperfield, as things get better as it goes along, and although things happen to others, his life starts to get better, even though it has tragedies off and on. I think the people in Copperfield are funnier at times than in this. And I find this mostly depressing. There are a couple moments where he says things that make me laugh, just because of the way he looks at them. But I didn't find a whole lot funny in this myself.
It's not the story that's funny, it's the telling of the story. The story is tragic, but it's told with a wink. And I think that's what I find here. Yeah, it's not a funny story. If you lay out the plot elements, it's sad, but it's just the turns of phrase and the way he sees it as a kid, I think, is what brings the humor.
Well, like he says, his mother had shit for brains, or he describes his grandmother's legs. They look like they have walnuts in them. I was like, oh God. That is humorous to me.
Yeah,
I
mean,
I heard this one person one time talking about a play that they went to, and I don't exactly remember what it was, but basically the play was mocking their culture, and they did not find it funny at all. And the entire audience was laughing, and they were like, "This is not funny at all." And it just like made me like when I read that quote from the critic, that's kind of like it reminded me of that. You know, like we can find it funny because we have no idea of that life, but like somebody who is reading it and has lived that would just be devastating to read, I think.
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's a funny book. I don't think it's a comic novel, but I think the resilience of the character of Demon and some of his, some of his phrases that reflect that kind of resilience and his honesty in viewing his own situation, are more or less in the, have a positive spirit about them. And I, there were times when I laughed out loud. It was something, I mean, the way he would just characterize somebody. But yeah, no, it is not, you're right. It's not a comic novel. It's not a comic novel. And
Just to
yeah,
okay, sorry.
go ahead.
I may glitch because I have kind of unstable internet right now. But to your point, Lee, I get that because I was like reading through this and I was like, oh my, it just never ends. This poor kid, and I was like having flashbacks to like fifth grade summer reading of like Where the Red Fern Grows and like what is it, A Long Way Gone, Memories of a Boy Soldier. Like reading through those things, I'm like, this is awful. Like why are you making me read this on summer vacation? And I think one of the things that I realized, not those things, I don't think either one of those had like a funny twist to them. But I feel like something that I noticed um, for this particular novel is that, and like having had, life experiences and having met lots of different people, is that sometimes people who have been through really, really awful, awful things have no way to cope except for to try and like make light of it or make some kind of joke or something like that, which is like the gallows humor, like Rachel was
Really
saying.
good.
And I feel like that's kind of what I'm picking up on in this book, that it's kind of like it's not funny to me because I'm like, this is all really awful stuff, and like I haven't had to confront it and I haven't had to live through it and get to a point where I'm like, well, I've got to try to make some kind of, I had to bring some joy out of this, outside of the heart. And I think that's kind of like, I had your knee jerk, like that was my knee jerk reaction too, is to be like, oh my God, this isn't funny
At the risk
at all.
of
But then
I
I
need to say
realized it's
something.
almost like a coping mechanism.
Yeah, go
ahead.
Back when I was in college, I worked at the Holocaust Museum. I did research at the Holocaust Museum, tracking genealogical research and finding kind of proof of camp systems that people had. And I worked with a lot of survivors, and they all had various different, different things about them. But you know where I learned all of my Holocaust jokes? Were from the Holocaust survivors that I worked with every day, because that's how they cope. So there are these horrible things. Like, how can you laugh? You literally lived at Auschwitz. How can you say that? But that's how they face it. Like, it's almost the epitome of it. And the first time you hear it, you just stop in your tracks and your jaw drops, and then you just get used to it. But yeah,
I think there's a
sorry if this
difference
little pop, but
between the person who's experiencing it using humor
Yeah.
and outsiders. Because like I've met
Yeah.
plenty of people. I've lived on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, like miserable, horrible living. And they are some of the funniest people you would ever know. But like if I wrote a story about them, there's no way in hell I would make it funny, like, or I don't know. I just, it's, I also understand and view and understand all your points of view. Like, I'm kind of always a devil's advocate. I'm open to all opinions and thoughts and feelings, and
so it's like
yeah.
appropriation in a sense, for lack of a better word, than appropriating someone else's trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Auschwitz twice, and just you're saying that, that Holocaust victims could joke about it. It's like, so I'm kind of getting what everybody is saying, because it's like, no. How could that be? How could that be? And yet, we all admit, or we would all say, well, geez, who the hell would want to live the life that Demon lives? What kind of what kind of a person would want to live, unless I guess he or she had it a hell of a lot worse than Demon. But, the point still, of course, that's nobody would. And we all feel, I think, a certain sympathy for him. But I guess part of it is just that, well, it's a testament to him as a character, and as a kind of spirit, that he can find some mirth in what he sees. His life sucks for the most part. Like, think about that job. Who's ever had a summer job like that? Like, none of us. Really, think about it. It's it's unreal, and yet he kind of analyzes it. He said, well, there's certain positives, there's certain negatives here, and he'll have a bon mot to throw at us about these characters that he's meeting there in his new job.
Even beyond his job, and his descriptions of the people he meets when he's hitchhiking.
Oh my God!
Various
Oh, I know.
drivers and the utility store, and the woman who steals his money. There's a little humor attached to each of those descriptions.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
woman who kept telling him to like, you go, or something like
That's
she
right.
kept
You
saying.
go. She was the one who watched Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Right.
Go you.
Yeah, it's so you.
and yeah, well, I guess that's where there's that kind of comic spirit a little. It's like he can talk about, how bad is it that all of his money was taken, right? Where most of
I
it
found that
was
one of the
taken.
most depressing parts of the book. That when he had all that money and she robbed him and made that whole big scene, I was like, there is nothing. In the first 20 pages, I just wanted to adopt this kid and have him come live at my house. But then when that happened, I was like, this is the worst. All he has is this little jar of quarters and she takes it all from him.
Yeah.
But how
He
does
does
he
nothing.
react? I guess what I'm after is, how does he react to that?
He's back on the road and said,
Is what it is.
same way I
Rolls with
came
the
into the
punches.
world. I'm going to my grandmother the way I came into the world with nothing.
Resilient.
It's like, oh,
And-
shucks. He
Yeah,
literally went to, "Aw,
no,
shucks."
I agree. It's like the nadir of his life, when he gets ripped off.
Are we drifting into another? Because I was going to say his English teacher, Mr. Armstrong, and by the way, he's into comic books, and I just feel
We're not
there is
there yet, I
definitely a
don't
tie
think.
to Stretch Armstrong.
Yeah,
But
you just violated the agreement.
I didn't think it was that far
So
away.
I'm not sure that
But-
I'm going to take back the table slap from
No,
last
you'll
week,
get to
but
that part.
I'll
But
let you
about
know. I'll
resilience.
email you about that.
I wanted to ask a quick question because
Yeah.
all of you went to GA, so you probably know. But I did laugh out loud when they had the slam books because my junior high kids had slam books. Have you ever seen a slam book, or was that new to you when you saw it in the book?
Like the burn book from
Yeah.
Mean Girls.
Like Mean Girls,
Well,
yeah.
maybe from Mean Girls, right? Okay, but in my junior high, there were a lot of really mean kids. You wouldn't believe what my junior high was like. But kids had slam books like that where they wrote rotten things about people, and you never wanted to see your page unless you thought it was going to have nice things on it.
Yeah,
But I was
me
Glad
too.
we didn't have that. Or
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
That's what happens when you go to school where they encourage people to be nice to one another as opposed to where everybody was being as mean as they possibly could to one another.
No, I was the victim of slam books.
There you go. So you did know about slam books.
Absolutely.
Okay, right.
I was gonna say, if you
just
don't
thought it was
know
a
about a
I was,
slam
generational
I
book,
thing.
was
might
vilified
have been on the
in
wrong
many
side.
of slam books. Yeah, but it was a real thing. Yeah.
I just wanted to say really quick, and I won't, let me take it back. I won't go further. This is going back, and just because I think we're moving away from the McDonald's area of the book, we can talk about it. But I did think it was interesting that the meetings that are planned for him between his mother and then eventually Stoner take place at McDonald's, because to me, McDonald's holds very little nutritional value. And the conversations that go on there, especially between Stoner, are totally void of nourishment at the end. And I just think that that's interesting. She chose McDonald's to have those kind of empty, no nourishment, no emotional value whatsoever conversations, especially at the end when Stoner is just indifferent, doesn't give a damn what the kid's gonna do.
That's really good. And to contrast that, well, there's a lot of talk about food. One is that he doesn't get much of it. But you know, he's kind of obsessed with, I mean, when you start drawing pictures of food, you know, that's you know, you really need some more of it. But I thought it was also interesting that the Mexican restaurant was a positive experience. Remember? And that, you know, I mean, we can get into argument about nutritional values at either place, but I would probably, if I had a choice, I'd probably go Mexican.
Of course. I mean, the way that she named McDonald's and then she said a
Yeah.
Mexican restaurant, it's totally different. I mean, it's totally different. Saying
That's
having a
right.
beer
Yeah.
and a shot of Jack Daniels, it's totally different.
Right. But remember, McDonald's are everywhere and they're cheap. And these people don't have, you know, there's no money to be really spent on this to take them somewhere nicer than this. And it's, oh, you know, McDonald's are at every highway intersection for, yes, we're going to meet up here and it's convenient for all of us to be there. I think that's another thing that, you know, people see as a familiar place that's everywhere. I mean, it could have been that or a Waffle House. It would have been the next thing I would have picked.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Has anybody ever been to a Waffle House? Okay. All right.
They're everywhere.
They are there. Yeah. I was
Like the dollar store and the Dollar
Walking distance
General,
from
like
my
out
dorm.
west.
I've
They're
only
everywhere.
been to them in Tennessee.
South Carolina, check. Myrtle Beach, Waffle House.
But well, this is sort of an interesting turn that we've taken here. Does anybody want to come up with a snappy close, because we're reaching the end here?
We are.
The only other thing that just, and this is could be hyper specific to me, so I apologize if this isn't relevant, but when he finally reaches out to his grandmom, he's like, "Hey, I'm your kid." I've actually had that conversation. I was adopted when I was a baby. Closed adoption, never knew my parents. Then there was the whole 23andMe. So I like that was probably the scariest part of the novel for me, because I've been there, like walking up to this random person like, "Hi, you don't know me.
Wow.
I'm your daughter. Hi." And so we don't know how, like, it seems to work out okay in the beginning. It worked out okay for me, thankfully too. But I just was thinking that was just a really weird, like, that for me was the scariest part of the novel, just because I'd been there and I felt the, like,
Well,
the
that
heart in your
moment,
chest when it's like sitting there, like, waiting for the reaction. And especially when she's like, "Oh, damn," like, obviously looking at him, knowing that what he is saying is true and just not quite sure how to take it, was just kind of a, like, I don't know, that stopped my heart, that part of the novel. But
well,
so just,
you know, and we'll see a lot more in the next, the next section about that, you know, what happens. I mean, you know, it's so great to me that we see all of these stops on his journeys, you know, and they're like major stops. And, you know, it's the old hero's journey, you know,